I'm Roger Baker, Executive Director of the Stratfor Center for Applied Geopolitics at RANE, a global center of excellence for geopolitical intelligence and analysis. Learn how you can put geopolitics to work for your organization at ranenetwork.com.
Hello and welcome to RANE's Essential Geopolitics podcast. Germany's increasingly unpopular and divided coalition government has finally collapsed, with Chancellor Olaf Scholz firing his finance minister and coalition partner Christian Lindner over fundamental disagreements on spending and economic reforms. Now Scholz is expected to call for an early election to take place sometime early next year, months ahead of schedule. RANE's Europe analyst Matteo Ilardo is here to lay out the future of Germany's leadership and the implications it will have for the country. Hi Matteo, it's great to speak with you again.
Hey Emma, great to be here again.
So, can you explain what happened over the past few days and why exactly did the German government collapse?
Yeah, so everything unfolded over the course of more or less 4 to 5 days, although arguably, and we'll talk about it later, I guess, this has actually been in the build-up for months now. So everything escalated last Friday when basically Lindner, the finance minister from the pro-business, fiscally conservative Free Democratic Party, one of the three parties composing the coalition government in Germany, now former coalition government, I would say. Basically on Friday he issued a controversial policy paper where he was calling for very drastic and controversial economic reforms to revive Germany's struggling economy. His proposals included things like corporate tax cuts, observing fiscal discipline by observing the country's so-called debt brake, basically constitutional limits to how much the government can borrow, cutting welfare benefits and watering down climate targets. And why are these so controversial, these proposals? Because they are absolutely unacceptable for his coalition partner Scholz from the SPD, and in particular, I would say, for the Greens of Economy Minister Robert Habeck. In fact, Habeck had himself unveiled a plan in just a few days earlier, an economic plan to revive Germany's economy, and it was a completely different plan that basically was proposing to increase spending through a multi-billion euro investment plans over the course of 5 years, basically proposing the exact opposite. Instead of spending cuts, spending increases. Instead of tax cuts, subsidies. And instead of watering down climate targets, accelerating investments in the energy transition to boost Germany's transition away from fossil fuels. So clearly, Lindner's proposals were designed to take a hard line on what basically became unconciliable economic, diverging economic views within the coalition. And Lindner demanded these measures as conditions for his approval of the budget for next year, which again has not been finalized, which is happening with a shortfall of north of 3 billion, perhaps more. And that has been the center of tensions recently within the coalition. But then again, as I was saying, to those who follow German politics, this certainly does not come as a shock. It's not a surprise, but rather this is the classic straw that breaks the camel back. We have seen these sort of tensions building up within the coalition for years, basically ever since the coalition took office in December in 2021. But over the past year, they had increased dramatically. Growth in Germany stagnated. Germany's economy is not growing and is expected not to grow that much next year either. They have been trying to figure out the exact recipe to relaunch the German economy, hence why Habeck's plan, hence why Lindner's plan. But this is happening amid a very difficult fiscal situation, because although Germany has certainly the money and the financial resources, the fiscal space to implement tax cuts, spending increases, etc., it has constitutionally provided budget constraints with the so-called debt brake that basically forces the government not to spend too much deficit in its fiscal plans. So this further complicated finding a compromise between such diverging economic ideas, and then the very poor electoral results recently for the three ruling parties. We saw that in the European Parliament elections in June, state elections in Eastern Germany in September, increased the pressure for all three of them to harden their stance, elevate their electoral profiles by defending what are their key ideas, their key flagship policies for their constituencies. And this means for Habeck increasing investments in the energy transition, for Scholz from the SPD, a center-left party, to maintain high welfare spending, and for Lindner, which is a fiscal hawk, this meant respecting fiscal discipline, cutting taxes, respecting the debt brake. And as the economy situation in the country has deteriorated over the past few months, basically divergences on how and to what extent spending the money to relaunch the economy became, as I was saying, impossible to reconcile. And so basically, Lindner here is making a very public statement about where his party stands in terms of fiscal policy, to defend traditional party lines on key issues for his constituency, which is respecting the debt brake, which is implementing pro-business policies such as tax cuts, and deciding to do so by exposing publicly the coalition's disagreements, publicly calling for measures like cutting climate and welfare spending, which, as you know, aren't politically acceptable for his coalition partners, made it impossible for the three parties this time around to reach a compromise on the budget for next year, but in general to just stick together and continue being a functioning government. And if so far weak polling for the three ruling parties had somewhat kept the likelihood of early elections, of a government collapse, relatively low, and this is especially true for the FDP, which is currently polling at 3%, which is below the 5% needed to enter government next year. So this has kept, so far, the likelihood of elections low. But now we probably have a situation in which Lindner is thinking, well, if I stay within such an unpopular, dysfunctional government, this 3% isn't going to increase anytime soon. But if perhaps I am the one who kills such an unpopular, dysfunctional government, maybe voters will reward me at the polls. And that's, I think, is the gamble from Lindner. We'll see whether it works out. But that's basically we arrived at the point where he made clear that no compromise was possible, and I think for the past few days, this seemed to be the only plausible scenarios for the coalition, a collapse and early election.
So I guess based on the polls and what you think based on your analyses, do you think he's right, or who else is in place to step in next?
Yeah, well, as I said, the Lindner's is clearly a gamble. I don't know whether he'll manage to cross the 5%. We'll see about that. But certainly he thought that staying in within the coalition didn't help either. So the next steps will be that we'll probably have the minority government, now a minority government between the SPD and Greens, staying on for a little while in a caretaking capacity, at least until next year. Scholz wants to call a confidence vote that he will likely lose in December which is the necessary step to then have early elections, which he says would happen in March. However, the opposition leader, Friedrich Merz, who is basically the most likely to become Germany's next chancellor, is calling for January election, so 2 months earlier. And that's key because if Scholz stays on a minority government, he would need the help of the CDU, the Christian Democrats, the Merz party, to pass policies, any legislation, the budget itself. So if the opposition says they don't want to collaborate with the minority government, this may force Scholz's hand and mean that early elections would actually happen earlier. But we'll see about that in the next few weeks. We'll have a clearer picture. What we know for sure is that Scholz is likely a politically dead man. I don't think he will realistically expect to perform very well in the next election. So won't the Greens, and so won't the FDP. The three parties are very unpopular after 3 years of such bad governance. So the likely winner from this situation is the main opposition party, the center-right coalition, basically between the CDU, the Christian Democrats, and their Bavarian sister party, the SCU. They're leading in the polls together, capturing right now more or less 32% of voting intentions, 33. They're followed by the far-right party, Alternative for Deutschland, with about 18, close to 20%. And then Scholz party with 16, the Greens with 10, and then recently created anti-establishment left-wing party. This is an interesting political innovation in Germany that is happening. It's basically a socially conservative left-wing party. We're talking about the newly created Sarah Wagenknecht Alliance at around 8 to 10%, and then the FDP, as said, which hopes this will help crossing the 5% threshold. Clearly, everybody's concern here is the far right, and I would say that's a reasonable concern when you talk about Germany, and especially in nowadays politics, where everybody is moving to the far right. And yes, in Germany we have a strong far-right party that is increasing in popularity, though Germany is a very particular country because of its history. Collaborating with the far-right isn't as feasible politically as it is in other European countries, where we saw far-right parties entering government, sometimes leading, like in Italy, sometimes as a junior partner, such as for instance, in Sweden, in Finland, but in Germany, this is likely not going to happen. My call is that the so-called cordon sanitaire will hold in Germany, and this means that nobody will want to collaborate with the AfD to form a coalition, a ruling coalition government. But strong results for the AfD and the left anti-establishment parties means that a lot of votes will be taken away from mainstream parties that have pledged not to collaborate with either of them, which means that there will be some very difficult, very complex coalition building required in Berlin after the vote to form a government. This means government formation negotiations will likely take months. The next German government will thus likely consist of a coalition led most likely by the CDU, so by the center-right, with one or more junior partners from the center or the center-left, either the SPD, the FDP, or the Greens. What does this mean for Germany? It means that this is one of those rare cases where a government collapse and early elections are actually potentially good news for the country in terms of political stability, in terms of policy uncertainty. The government we had so far in Germany was one characterized by constant infighting, which meant very slow policy making, very erratic policy making, which meant that many decisions were later on reversed, which complicated policymaking at the EU level as well, not just domestically. And so now a change in government for one that is more stable certainly will reduce these constant political issues that we had in Germany for now 3 years. But of course, all depends on the future composition of the government. If we have a two-party alliance, which is possible if the CDU, for instance, decides to make an alliance with the SPD, which, despite ideological differences, isn't nothing new in Germany. Germany had the so-called Grand Coalition between the center-left and the center-right several times in history, twice, if I'm not wrong, under former Chancellor Merkel. So this is a possibility, and this would guarantee enough votes, enough seats in parliament, at least according to the current polls, to have a two-party coalition government. The CDU may otherwise decide to ally itself with the Greens. That's possible, although complicated by the fact that they have very different policy stances. But there are also areas of collaboration, such as foreign policy, defense policy. Or they could ally with the FDP, but probably the FDP, although it's closer politically, ideologically, in terms of policy to the CDU, most likely won't have enough seats to allow for a two-coalition government. So this means that a three-party alliance is also possible, which, if it happens again, means that Germany would likely remain in the same state as the past government, an ideologically diverse, somewhat fragile coalition that takes time to take decisions, that these decisions are never really written in stone. There's constant bickering, constant going back and forth to find compromise. And this would be bad news for Germany, because it means that policies held back is again a problem. And this happens at times when Europe needs leadership, because we have Trump recently elected in the US. Europe needs to take more leadership on defense. It needs to defend itself against eventual trade tariffs from the United States. It needs a strong Germany. And with France also out of the picture, with a lot of political troubles domestically there, having a stable government in Berlin is very, very important. And to conclude more broadly, the most likely scenario is we'll have a CDU-led government. This means, and then again, depending exactly on the exact composition of the next ruling coalition, we most likely have a government that is likely stricter on migration policies, that has a greater focus on security and border controls, which is less ambitions on climate policy, perhaps prioritizing energy security, economic competitiveness over emission reduction targets. But this may change, of course, if the Greens become part of the alliance. There's increased support for traditional industries like automotive, like energy-intensive sectors. But there's also significant, if not complete, policy continuity in areas such as foreign and defense policy. And this because the CDU, just like the SPD and all three coalition partners so far, are very pro-Ukraine, very pro-NATO, very hawkish against Russia. So continuity in that sense. Fiscal policy may again prove the one thing that destabilizes the coalition. If it's a three-party alliance, we would have again a more fiscally conservative CDU, this time around being the senior partner, not the smallest one like the FDP, but again having to clash with a more expansionary fiscal stance of one of eventual left-leaning partners like the SPD or the Greens. So depending how the vote goes, we may have a more stable German government or a repeat of the past 3 years.
Thanks, Matteo. It's great to hear your thoughts on this.
Thank you, Emma. My pleasure.
For more risk insights and analyses, visit ranenetwork.com, where you can learn more about our suite of risk intelligence products and solutions. That's RANE network.com. Thanks for listening.